All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming to our very first ePern seminar for this year. We're joined today by Paolo Silvestri with his great paper. It just came out in the European Journal of History of Economic Thought. Before we begin, though, we do have a quick announcement from Mikayla.
Thank you very much, Dave. And I'm very delighted to say that coinciding with this very first day of the seminar series for ePern for this academic year, that a new book has been released by Springer Nature. The book is entitled Realism, Ideology and the Convulsions of Democracy, and the co-editors of the book, the esteemed Dick Wagner, Marta, the executive director of this august organization, and yours truly. And in fact, there is a very rich representation, obviously, of entangled political economy insights and theorists in this volume. So, for example, we'll have Sir Jim Caton, Gianpaolo, and a number of others as well represented in this volume that has been released today. My understanding is that there'll be a blog post on the ePern website produced very shortly, providing an outline for the new book. And please, by all means, have a look for the book being publicized around social media and on the Springer website itself. So again, the title of the book, Realism, Ideology and the Convulsions of Democracy, representing several novel advances in entangled political economy. And thank you very much, Dave, for the link that you see in chat. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I will say you can download the entire book for free as a PDF or an EPUB. And you can also go back and get several other volumes in the series for free as a PDF, which has been a great discovery on my part in the last 30 minutes. So I suspect I will be filling up my Kindle with plenty of things in the near future. Marta, did you have something or?
Do we need like a special instruction to do that? Like how does one?
No, you can just download it. Just click download and it shows up.
Because I saw the price and I was a little discouraged, but okay.
Yep.
I'm trying to do just that and failing. I hope it's okay if I interrupt to say that. I clicked the link. I see access via your institution, which for my institution was a failure.
Well, I tell you what, I will send the PDF out to the group later on today.
This is because you are great.
I am. I try to be as great as I can be. I had fantastic professors. All right, at this point, I would love to turn it over to Paolo. Paolo, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Marta and Mikayla, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure and honor to be part of this research network. As far as I know, I'm also the very first one to start this academic year series of seminars. So once more, it's a true pleasure and honor. So let me share the screen. It's a little bit slow, but I should do that. I don't know why my computer is a bit slow. Let's see what I can do. Okay. Okay. Okay, so do you see the whole screen now? The full screen?
Not yet. It did take a second the first time around.
Okay. Let me know when you see the full screen.
There it is.
Okay, great. So it seems to be a little bit delayed. So, okay, the title of the paper is Luigi Einaudi's Scienza delle Finanze, or the Science of Good Government. Let me put just a reminder of the time. Okay. So the structure of this presentation is no more than the structure of the six sections of the paper. I'll be more or less following them, even though I'll be focusing a little bit more on the fourth and fifth section, because the paper is a little bit long. So I need to compact at least the very first three sections that are a sort of premise of the paper, to reach the core that is, as I said, the fourth and the fifth section. So the main aim of the paper is to rediscover Luigi Einaudi's, I would say, humanistic Scienza delle Finanze. And when I say humanistic, I mean Einaudi's attempt to understand the Scienza delle Finanze by putting the man and the good polity at the very heart of his reflection. So we start by providing you with a background of this research, which is part of a much longer research. So it's overall an attempt to rediscover Einaudi's science of good government. And then I will compact the second and third section by providing you the big picture of Einaudi's fiscal process between society and state, and at the same time trying to give you some basic understanding of Einaudi research for the foundation of a good polity on at least the three levels of this research, that is the human liberty, society, and institution. And then I will get to the core, that is Einaudi attempt to go beyond the Italian tradition in public finance. Henceforth, I will simplify it with ITPF. And also Einaudi's attempt to go beyond fiscal schemata. And I will conclude by with a little, I would say this is a further development of Einaudi's thought, that is the critical point theory, which is a theory of liberty in between good and bad polities. And to conclude with some, I will also conclude with some further reflection and further research paths. So the main claim of the paper is this one. Einaudi shows why the fiscal process is at the heart of horizontal, vertical reciprocities and virtuous and virtuous cycles between society and state, and why a good polity needs free and morally responsible people. I hope to show you the meaning of this claim throughout my presentation. So let me start with the background, why there is a need to rediscover Einaudi science of good government. Well, there are many reasons. First of all, because my focus is on a rather neglected part of Luigi Einaudi's thought, that is his latest reflection in between 1940 and 45, where in these 5 years, Einaudi was really trying to go beyond the Italian tradition in public finance, even if it was also trying to keep some of the basic assumption of the Italian tradition in public finance, the basic approaches and the basic conceptual tools all together, but as I will show, in a way that puts them in, I would say, in a complementary way. To begin with, I started the paper with two quotations that are, in a sense, two guiding quotations. The first one is the Periclean polis reached its crowning glory, not because of the way it conducted its financial affairs, but because Periclean finances were at one and the same time the condition, the effects, and the sign of a society that had achieved political perfection. And the second one is more related to the critical point theory. If there exists a sufficient number of truly free men in a society, it does not matter what its social or political economic organization is, the latter cannot kill the spirit. This is a rather mysterious quote, and I will try to develop them throughout the paper. At the background, there is also the need to revise a little bit the interpretation of the Italian tradition in public finance. In this regard, I was also relying on Eusebi and Wagner paper on De Viti De Marco. They noticed that the early translation and interpretation of the works of Mazzola, Pantaleoni, and Montemartini, that is the early founders of the Italian tradition in public finance, however amenable to marginalist interpretation of matters of state, ended up obscuring the existence of significant institutional differences between markets and states. Now, I think that this paper on De Viti De Marco is true, of course, for De Viti De Marco, But these claims, as I will also show in the conclusion, are even truer for Luigi Einaudi. And there is a need to revise this kind of settled or shared interpretation of the Italian tradition in public finance, because most of the times I think they are misleading. We know that Buchanan provided his very famous paper on the Italian La Scienza delle Finanze, provided one of the most famous interpretation of the Italian tradition in public finance. But much of the following interpretation ended up obscuring not only these differences between markets and the state, but also other scholars like Luigi Einaudi. Even though Luigi Einaudi was one of the most praised scholar by Buchanan, but this very latest reflection by Einaudi is rather ignored. And I think it is extremely important to understand what Einaudi was trying to do to overcome some of the main difficulties of the Italian tradition in public finance. To understand what he was trying to do, let's think about the main analytical tools and approaches developed by the Italian tradition in public finance. They can be easily summarized into these distinctions. Sometimes they are thought as opposites, sometimes they are more nuanced: market and state, voluntary exchange versus fiscal coercion, economic approaches versus political sociological approaches. Now, to summarize, I can say I've claimed that Einaudi's last reflection could be understood as an attempt to rethink the above distinctions in more nuanced, complementary, and non-dichotomous terms. And at the same time, Einaudi was the only scholar who developed an inquiry into the causes of good and bad polities, searching for the foundation of a liberal society and connecting them to his reflection on public finance. Okay, so let's try to understand what Einaudi was really trying to do in this latest reflection. The premise, as I told you, are already provided in the paper in the first three sections. So now I'm going to compact the second and the third section, in particular the fiscal process between society and state, and the interlude, that is Einaudi's way of understanding or searching for the foundation of a good polity. The three layers of his reflection are the human, the societal, and institutional layers. So to begin with, consider the following. Einaudi conceives the good-bad tax and more generally the good-bad fiscal system within the horizon of good-bad polity, that is, of good-bad society and good-bad government. So the big picture provided by Einaudi is a rather historical and phenomenological one. Good and bad are never opposed to each other by Einaudi. There is also a little bit of good in the bad, or a little bit of bad in the good. So it's a way to understand, Einaudi's reflection, I mean, is a way to understand the rise and fall of civilization, or the passage or the transition from good to bad society, or vice versa. And in the fiscal process, in this regard, it's a crucial junction for Einaudi of the complementarity of society and state, which implies that it must be understood, on the one hand, in its entirety and circularity between revenues and expenditure, and shifting the emphasis from the burdens to the benefits of taxation. And secondly, the fiscal process is conceived by Einaudi as a complex, more legal, political, economic institution in and through which citizens live as members of the community and interact with the governing class. Now, this can be represented with this kind of big picture. You see, on the one hand, sort of stylized representation of society and market on the one hand, and the state and ruling class on the other, on the top of the picture. And at the center, at the heart of this picture, you see the public sphere. In brackets, you also read the state is represented by the ruling class. The public sphere is mainly composed in this ideal vision of the good society by the middle class. I will tell you something about this a little bit later. And the society and market mainly represented by citizen taxpayer. The circle also represents the circularity, on the one hand, between expenditure and revenue, and therefore the flow, I would say, of money that goes from the state then to the society, and then comes back to the state. There are also in this big picture, let me first show you these two arrows, forms of vertical and horizontal or positive and negative reciprocity. That means simply that the relationship between the state and society and market is not only complementary, to use Richard Wagner words, we can say they are entangled, but they are entangled also in the sense that this kind of circularity implies that the state, by providing public goods and services, providing the basic legal and economic infrastructure through which society and market can produce. At the same time, this raises the revenue that comes back to the state, and which can in turn be used for further expenditure and public goods. So in Einaudi, there is no such a thing as an opposition between the state and the market. As I said, it's more circular, to the point that Einaudi provided this theory of the state as a factor of production, which means that the state, through taxes, produces public goods and services. And it's in a relation of circularity with the other factors of production. They in turn produce this kind of revenue that I mentioned, that serves, that is mainly functional to nurture, I would say, state's coffer and to provide further public good and services. The horizontal arrow is mainly about a form of horizontal reciprocity, and that is I would say the level of cooperation between citizen and taxpayer to provide public goods and services. So, I mean, the level of cooperation for the contributions to public goods and services. Now, all these kinds of reciprocity, vertical and horizontal, are, as any form of reciprocity, can be positive or negative. They can generate virtuous or vicious cycle of reciprocity. So they work well, for example, when there is a sufficient level of cooperation to contribute to public goods, or they cannot work well if this sufficient level is not reached. When I also when I mentioned this idea of reciprocity, in Einaudi's view, there is also, or there must be, to be more precise, a minimum level of fair cooperation between the ruling class and citizen taxpayer. By fair cooperation means that if the state provides public goods and services, this might be a necessary condition in order for citizen taxpayer to pay taxes. In other words, this is no more than the benefit principle of taxation applied to an aggregate level, which means that if the state provides these public goods and services, this might be sufficient to raise an obligation to pay for them. I know that this is particularly troublesome, but I will leave this issue maybe to the final debate. Now, when I talk about good government, or Einaudi's vision of good government, is first of all important to mention Einaudi's understanding of man and liberty, which is at the basis of any attempt provided by Einaudi to understand what is and what should be a good polity. And Einaudi's vision of man and liberty is mainly twofold. On the one hand, it is based on an anti-perfectist Christian anthropology, that is, the man as a fallible being, not perfect, yet perfectible. And this idea of liberty is, in a sense, the engine of history. And this is also the reason why Einaudi's understanding of the movement from good to bad polities, or from bad polities to good polities, is mainly based on this idea of liberty. Now, since it is the man who inhabits this good polity, the core of Einaudi's reflection, it is also important to understand the most general meaning of good government, that is the ideal type of political community. And in this sense, good government is has got the same meaning of good polity or good constitution, whereby good constitution, we classically mean the good, the political body of the society that is and should be organized for the pursuit of the common good. There are also specific and historical meanings of good government. The most famous ones are rule of law versus rule of man, and government for the common good versus government for the private good, being it a tyrant or a faction, and so forth. And there is also a third meaning, I will skip through this, that is the art of governing well the republic. Now, usually the first two meanings, the first two specific historical meaning, are usually put together under the rubric of mixed constitution or mixed government. And there, once more, the middling ranks or the middle class plays a fundamental role, because it's the classic meaning of the government between the rule of the one and rule of the many. So this is the reason why the middling rank is, or the middle class is middle, at least in the sense that it plays a mediating and balancing function in the society. Okay, now these are the premises, but let me just mention what Einaudi was trying to do in the very last two chapters of his book, Myths and Paradoxes of Justice in Taxation. Why the last two chapters? Because these two last chapters were added to the second edition of this book, and they were for quite a while rather neglected, because we were under fascism, and I mean, the debate over these two chapters was raised by a pupil of his, that is Mauro Fasiani. By the way, Mauro Fasiani was also the very first scholar who provided the most important, I would say, picture or fresco of the Italian tradition in public finance, on which I guess Buchanan relied quite a lot. And these two chapters were written in a moment in which Einaudi was really trying to go beyond the Italian tradition in public finance, also thanks to this debate with this pupil, Mauro Fasiani. These two chapters are mainly the supreme paradox of taxation and historical schemata and ideal schemata. Now, in the penultimate chapter, the supreme paradox of taxation, Einaudi was trying to show the inapplicability of marginalism to public good, and that was his way to point to the limits of the so-called economic approaches in the Italian tradition in public finance. And he was also trying to face the problem of tax coercion and its legitimacy. And that was his way to point to the limits of the so-called political sociological approaches. In the very last chapter, instead, he was trying to build his own political schemata through an analysis of historical ideal forms of good-bad polities in relation to their fiscal system. And he was also trying to show the limits, the legal political limits of Wicksel's schema or model. To sum up what Einaudi was trying to do, first, he was trying to construct his own political schemata. Why they are termed political? Because Einaudi conceives them as complementary to the economic schemata, let's say the voluntary exchange paradigm. And to explain the condition both of cooperation among citizens and between them and the political class, and of the legitimacy of power in general and the power to tax in particular. And this also involves addressing the great question of coercion. And secondly, he seeks to understand the condition of the formation of citizens' free consent by free adherence to the founding values of the community and a consent to taxation, not out of fear of coercion, but out of free choice and personal conviction. This leads us to the first quote that I mentioned. The city that Periclean polis reached its crowning glory not because of the way it conducted its financial affair, but because Periclean finances were at the same time the condition, the effect, and the sign of a city that had achieved political perfection. Now, what does it mean, this? First, as I told you, Einaudi was trying to understand in his ideal types of fiscal processing and good societies, or fiscal processes within good society. He was trying to understand the connection between a sound public finance and a sound and good society. But at the same time, it was also trying to show how they are connected in a circular way. When he said that they are the one at the same time, the condition, the effect, and the sign of a city, is claiming that there are virtues and vicious cycle always at stake in every society, whether it be good or bad, and therefore he was pointing to the need to study this kind of vicious cycle of contribution to the public good. So a very good example is Einaudi that starts to study this kind of free and voluntary contribution or gifts to the res public, for example, the so-called liturgies in the Periclean polis, and as forms of virtues or vicious cycle of contribution, and their connection with forms of good bad government and good bad society. Why this is important? Well, not only because they represent forms of free and voluntary contribution, but also because for Einaudi they represent a sort of glue of the society. As he said, one of the highest expressions of the civic sense of the Athenian citizens. But there is a but, and the but is that he also discovers that such forms of voluntary contribution do not last forever. So, in a sense, he was pointing to something that historically, not only in the Periclean polis, but also in many other forms of good societies that he studied, coercion is not as necessary as many legal political scholars of the Italian tradition in public finance were claiming. And therefore, what he was trying to show is that there is a moment in which it could be possible, these forms, this kind of free and voluntary contributions are possible, but at the same time, coercion enters into play when they do not work or when they do not last for such a long time, or when they become to be corrupted in some sense. I will come back on this later. Let me just point to Wicksell and now this understanding of Wicksell schema. He provides two important claims and critiques of Wicksell schema. First, it is considered as utopian because the qualified majority voting doesn't really solve the issue of filibustering. And secondly, because there is no historical example of such constitutional or parliamentary Wickelsian model. But Einaudi is also trying to save Wicksell model if it is considered as a form of oversimplified stylization of first a delegation of power to a good elite, the valenti or pars, and secondly as a true democratic, that is a public discussion solution aimed at reaching a mutual recognition and understanding, what Einaudi calls compromise, assent, or reciprocal endorsement between majority and minorities. But there is a concluding statement that is really harsh about Wicksell, and this is the following. Wicksell established a constitutional mechanism, the place where historical experience should be located. In itself, the constitutional mechanism is nothing, and he also had that he mentioned the Wicksell mechanism simply as a reminder of how theoreticians eternally aspire to extend the dominion of the Mengerian table from the private to the public sphere of life. Now let's try to understand why Einaudi claims that in itself this mechanism is nothing. As a constitutional mechanism is nothing. First, because for Einaudi, tax coercion belongs to the pathology and not the physiology of the relationship between individual and institution. Now, Wicksell was also trying to solve the problem of coercion because Wicksell's scheme was mainly based on a voluntary exchange, I would say, paradigm. But Einaudi was also trying to show through his analysis of the fiscal gift or liturgies that the sanction of coercion enters into play only when the minimum level of cooperation among citizens and between citizens and institutions that is needed to keep society alive is about to break up, or in other words, when the virtuous cycle of cooperation is about to turn into a vicious one. So tax coercion for Einaudi should not be perceived as such if the power and the power to tax were based on shared and recognized values and or shared sense of mutual trust, or an atmosphere of compromise, as he calls it, and assent or consent, namely mutually acknowledgement, first of all, in modern democratic regimes between the majority and minority, where the consent is, first of all, the presupposition of a democratic vote, and not only its result. Otherwise, the majority's decision would never be acknowledged by the minority. So Einaudi reasoning simply implies that a good or bad society or a good bad government is founded, in this case, he's talking about a model of good society and good government, is founded on cultural, moral, and symbolic foundations, that is, the fiduciary, or what is today known as social capital, and symbolic resources, which constitute the foundation of every social bond and through which societies manage to overcome the so-called social dilemmas, such as that of public good and free riders. Now, when Einaudi also points to this fiduciary or trust-based foundation of institution, he's pointing to what he later calls the spirit of the law, that is related to, as we will see, to the critical point theory. So to sum up, I would say that a good polity needs good rules and institution, at least for Einaudi, but these are not enough. So their good functioning is never an automatism, but depends on a human or spiritual substratum. So their good functioning depends, I would say, on men of goodwill, let me spend this word, who respect and give them trust and credit, who strive to keep virtuous cycles alive, for example, the virtuous cycles of contribution, who strive to cooperate, even when it costs them sacrifice, for the common good. So a good polity for Einaudi needs good citizens, the so-called valentia or pars, capable of choosing also a good ruling class, the elect class. So a good polity is made of good people. The very last point is, as I told you, the critical point of liberty between good and bad polities. It can be summed up in this way. The critical point simply states, or the critical point theory simply states, that there always exists a limit, a point beyond which every element of social life, way of life, custom, or more generally, even every social, legal, or political institution that until then had been a means of human elevation and improvement becomes a tool of degeneration and decadence. It is the limit beyond which what before was good, virtues, transforms into bad, virtues, and vice versa. However, there exists for Einaudi no theoretical rule that can predict if and when we will go past such limits. So Einaudi reaches this kind of, I would say, synthetical point of view, the critical point theory, through his analysis of virtue and virtue cycles of contribution in models of good and bad societies. And he then understands that the true problem is understanding when we turn from one circle to another, from one virtuous to one virtuous circle, and vice versa. So the critical point theory is a theory, I would say, is an anthropological theory of limits and freedom. This can be explained through analysis, Einaudi analysis of welfare policies and the relation between citizen and the political class. He mentioned, for example, the electors' race to ask and the political parties' race to promise increases to the state pension. And he is mainly worried about that the welfare state will end up transforming into something that is the panem et circenses of the Roman Empire. So the Rome did not fall under the barbarians' blows, he said. It had already fallen before, rotten from internal corruption, which found blunt expression in the mortal words panem et circenses. So what does this mean? I would say, to sum up, that for Einaudi there is no theoretical or institutional solution to this kind of problems, the problem of the welfare state, because they are simply moral or spiritual problems and have to do with the always problematic relationship between institutions and freedom. Of course, this doesn't mean that institutions are not important. But institutions, or the letter of the law, as he calls them, are one thing, and their spirit is another. To conclude with Einaudi's quote, freedom, which is a requirement of the spirit, which is a moral ideal and duty, does not need a legal institution that ratify and protect it. Freedom exists if free men exist. it dies if men's souls are enslaved. So freedom does not depend on exterior facts, such as social and political organizations. These are not the cause, but the result of freedom or the lack thereof. If there exists a sufficient number of truly free men in a society, it does not matter what its social or political economic organization is. The latter cannot kill the spirit. Now, this also, of course, raises the question of what is this sufficient number of men or truly free men? How many free men we need to get to a good society, or how many free men we need to turn a vicious cycle into a virtuous one. Note that this problem was very clear to Einaudi, especially in the darkest year of fascism, when the Italian society entered into this spiral of decadence. So the problem for him became how many free men we need to turn this virtuous cycle into a virtuous one. And this problem was very clear to Einaudi, also because the Italian society entered into the fascist regime through liberal institutions. So he was very well aware that legal institutions are not enough, even though they are a necessary condition, they are not enough for a free society. We need free men, or at least a sufficient number of truly free men, so that this kind of virtuous cycles can be turned upside down. To conclude, I would say that in an authentic and liberal society of adult and responsible citizens, the answer to such moral issues, as well as to the various issue of limits that Einaudi encountered in his research and that I pointed to you, can only concern citizens' freedom and responsibility. That is, their ability or inability to together keep that spirit of the law alive, and their ability or inability to not let themselves be killed by those institutions that were created to serve and not to subdue freedom. So a sound public finance in a sound welfare state implies a society made up of free and morally responsible individuals. Just 3 remarks about further research paths. Now they show how to avoid 2 theoretical snares. Again, here I'm quoting the paper by Wagner and Eusebio. And now this shows why it's problematic to treat state activity as fundamentally indistinct from market activity. And this is the always recurring marginalist temptation of fusing market and state. And this was made by Einaudi through his analysis of Wicksell scheme. But he also shows that taxation should not be treated as a type of uncaused cause. Excess burden theory, ability to pay, optimal tax sacrifice theories, they all fall into this kind of theoretical snare. And finally, we need to rethink the intellectual relationship between the Italian tradition in public finance, Wicksell, Einaudi, and I would also add David De Marco, and Buchanan. For example, Buchanan kept on repeating that the 2 main sources of his thought were Wicksell on the one hand, the Italian tradition in public finance, but Buchanan never mentioned Einaudi reading of Wicksell. This is a mystery to me, as if Wicksell and the Italian tradition in public finance were really 2 separate sources, but Einaudi was trying to show even the limits of Wicksell. Also, Buchanan was always relying on the lessons of political realism that he said to have learned from the Italian tradition in public finance. And even the modern public finance has been relying on the critique of the benevolent state that is strongly related to this political realism. To conclude, we also need to rethink the constitutionally engineering formulas or rules of the game, or the claim that the rules of the game matter more than the players, because I would say that Einaudi might claim something like, yes, institution matters, but people matter more. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Paolo, so much. At this time, I'd love to open it up for Q&A and further discussion. Jim.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful paper. And I would have raised my hand, but I'm just technologically deficient here. in terms of Zoom. So you brought something up that I think is critical in your discussion about the polis and what I might refer to as the civic liturgy. This idea that there's this pattern of practices, this sort of poetry of action that we all share, that maybe teaches us to be civically good. Can you speak more to that concept? Because you talked about it for a hot second, and then it was gone.
Okay, can I reply now, or should we collect more questions?
No, please go ahead and reply now.
No, James, thank you. This is I think a good question, and it's well. First, let me give you the historical background of that research by Einaudi. Einaudi was trying to first rediscover forms of voluntary contribution to the Republic. First, because he wanted to show that coercion is not a necessary character of the state. It's possible to have forms of maybe little society, not big society. He was aware that this kind of voluntary contribution not only do not last forever, but cannot work in the big society. So there is a problem of coordination, I would say, in this case. But he found them interesting because not only they were a form of voluntary contribution to the Republic, but because, well, I forgot to mention this, that the good elite, that is not the cynical elite that Pareto, Mosca, Michels, and many other political Italian scientists were talking about, the good elite is capable of raising this kind of revenue, especially in the periculum polis, from the rich, and at the same time, the good elite was capable of avoiding any sort of confiscation from the people that may be the kind of degeneration of the polis. So the liturgies were, in a sense, and I devoted to the liturgia kind of 3 or 4 pages of the last pages of the myths and paradoxes of justice and taxation, to show how they can be a part of the public budget, in the sense that they were, at least at those time, I would say, a conspicuous part of the public revenues, but at the same time, also to show that they have a kind of, they may also degenerate. So in Einaudi, you will always find something that is good, but is never entirely good. There is some seeds of corruption, even in the elevation of the good polity. And therefore, it shows that this kind of voluntary contribution at a certain point turn into a form of coercion. The very same liturgies that were widely shared, that were, in a sense, provided mainly by the rich, but they were a good part of the revenue. At a certain point, and this is the humanistic analysis by Einaudi, were destroyed by human relations of envy, hatred. So Einaudi makes this kind of anthropological analysis of taxation in terms of the wealthy were the subject of the envy of some other wealthy people, or they were the subject of, let's say, request from the poor to give more. So the poor, instead of being satisfied with this kind of public good and services provided by the state, were, precisely because this was a gift, they were asking for more and more contribution to the rich. So Einaudi was showing how this relation, I would say passional or sentimental, so to say, relationship between the citizens of the periculum polis were, in a sense, compromised by this kind of behavior. So I don't know if I replied to your question, but I hope, I mean,
maybe I can narrow it and make it short for everybody else. But what made these things apparently good when they were voluntary donations? There seems like there's some story behind that. It couldn't just be that they said, let's make voluntary donations. Like, you know, what the heck is motivating that within the polity?
So you are asking what are the motivation to give such voluntary contributions?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, Einaudi makes this kind of claims. On the one hand, there is a desire to be excellent, so there is I would say, excellent on the side of the rich and the wealthy. So they were made also as a form of, I would say, ostentation. I don't know to call it, as a form of showing that they were rich, but they were also made for good purposes. That is, they were made mainly to finance public ceremonies, spectacles, and things that were part of the attempts made by the good ruling elite, I would say, to keep the society together. So the gift was also, in this sense, not only a way to show that the rich were rich or the wealthy were wealthy, but also a way to show that they were really contributing to the common good of the polis.
All right, Roger.
Sorry, I was so wrapped up, I forgot to unmute. I always thank you so much for the presentation. That's awesome. In spite of being a major Italophile, I've never done a satisfactory dive into the Italian public finance tradition. But I always struggle with this kind of stuff. You know, Buchanan has his unanimity criterion, which I guess comes from Excel, but then you have to be a reasonable man, and then somehow it's Rawls, so there's really only one mind, and I just get confused. And I'm confused right now. Is it somehow true, as I got the impression, like if Einaudi is saying that you know, it's all about virtue, and virtue is the uncaused cause in his system, because that seems, you know, I'm right with him if he's like, written constitutions don't constrain. It's like, yeah, sadly they don't, but no, somehow there's this concept of virtue in there. You have to be good men, and then this goodness is somehow antecedent to everything else. Am I getting it all wrong here? Can you clarify a little bit to help a poor boy out here?
Okay, I think this can be clarified by relying on the distinction between the letter and the spirit of the law. I mean, good institutions and good rules can be good as such, so they can work well, but they always need a man that makes them, in a sense, let's say, alive. By alive, I mean that they are not simply an automatism. You need sometimes people that strives to keep the spirit of the law alive. Now, to use an example, consider the classic Nazis' attitude. They were obeying the law for the sake of the law, not for the spirit of the law. Okay, so they were obeying the law and they were following as automatons the commands of the rules. So Einaudi provides this example by distinguishing between Caesar and Christ, by saying, of course, you have to obey Caesar's command, but there is a time when you have to say no. And the no means that law might be contrary to your conscience. So you are, for example, not obeying the law because you are obeying a superior's idea of the spirit of the law. Or if you want to implement the law, this law needs to be...
Okay, so let me put my question like this. I hope it's okay if I jump in. Oh, damn it, I had the wording a moment ago. Sorry, I really apologize for groping in this way. What you're not explaining, okay, so as an individual, okay, it's like very existential, you know, right? You have to choose good over evil, Sartre and all that stuff like that. Okay, that's groovy. That's meaningful, I think, for an individual. But you're not telling me when the political economic system is going to rise to the defense of liberty, and when it will instead crush liberty, whatever might be the institutions. You're not telling me when people are going to be good and choose good, and when people are going to be evil and choose evil. So I feel like, where's the explanation social process here.
I see the point. Yes, so now it doesn't tell you, and I don't tell you when people are good or bad. Consider this, the example he had, these were my very final words before the conclusion. Consider that he had this trouble. As an Italian, he knew that the fascist regime went into power going through liberal institutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So liberal institutions were already in place. Italy also had a constitution. Of course, it was a weak constitution. It was not such a reinforced mechanism like the present we got now, as in many other countries, but there were a constitution. And the problem that Einaudi had was, how come so many people endorse fascism? Of course, they were going out from the so-called Red 2 years, the protest of, the conquer of the land, or other, the conquer of the land, I would say, but also the conquest of businesses and big businesses by the working class. So the so-called bourgeoisie were, in a sense, scared about what was going on. And so Einaudi was puzzled by, the fact that the middle class gave up his liberty in exchange for security. Now, of course, it doesn't say when they are behaving good or well, where they are behaving good or bad. He knows that at a certain point, at an aggregate level, a certain behavior, like the phenomenon of contribution, you need to reach, or public contribution, you need to reach a certain level to have this kind of virtuous cycle injected. So the theory of critical point is not a theory that can predict when this happens. It simply tells that it can happen. It simply tells that there is a limit beyond which what before was good, the Italian institution, legal political institutions, and before fascism, then became bad. And they were the same law. Of course, they were transformed after a few years. Fascism made a mess of this kind of institutions. But it was possible that we moved from a regime of liberty to a regime of tyranny under the very same institution. So the problem was, how come, having these rules, the same rules, we had this kind of very bad system? So I don't think there is a theoretical answer to your question, because Einaudi was simply stating that it's up to you as citizen, together with many other citizens, so it's individually and collectively, that you have to find a moment or the right thrust or the right push, so that at a certain point you all together say, no, this institution is unjust and need to be changed.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll go to Dick next.
Okay. I find it interesting that you look at both Einaudi and Duvidi were engaged, or professors of public finance at one time in their lives, who also were engaged in politics, although Duvidi at an earlier stage in his life than Einaudi as president after the war. But one thing that came out of their works that I found interesting was they were very remote from any notion of welfare economics as forming the core of public finance, and it was much more, I think, a realistic kind of concern with how can a variegated lot of people get along decently well together, whereas welfare economics seems to have its mode of operation by asking, if you compress some ideal type of person, set up people into a common kind of utility functions, what becomes the optimal this or that. And so it's like welfare economics, as Samuelson pushed into the theory of public goods, has already solved or resolved, I should say, all of the problems of governance that are irresolvable. And I think that gets into questions like, for instance, when Einaudi remarks about Wicksell, Wicksell's investigations in the theory of public finance had 3 essays. The longest essay was the 3rd one, which took up half of the book. Actually, I think it was more than half. And one significant part of that essay was trying to explain that there was a long Swedish tradition where significant sets of people could not be taxed without receiving permission to be taxed. Farmers were one such group, and so in that sense, Wicksell's unanimity kind of principle wasn't really kind of imposing something from some welfare condition, I think, as it was looking back and saying that within the lived practice of Swedes in governing themselves, there were many recognizable cases where people had to consent to being taxed. And I know in terms of controversies among Italians about issues of public finance, when you use terms like good and bad, a good polity is made up of good people. It's hard to dispute that too much, although it can be disputed. But for instance, what would you make of Pareto and his concern with humanitarianism? When Pareto was very strongly opposed to humanitarianism, and it gets into a topic that Mikayla actually wrote in a recent book on social welfare kinds of issues, where say that, well, if humanitarian sympathies are addressed to oppressed people is a common formulation, but don't you also then have the question of whether it is someone else who is oppressing a person who claims to be oppressed, or whether it is in that person's own mentality lies the so-called oppression? That is, there's this idea, goes back to as Blake, mind-forged manacles of any of you who happened to have done as I did ages ago and read some William Blake. And I think there's something very significant about do we conceive of the opportunities that someone faces as being objects that they confront, or are those opportunities obstacles that reside in our mind? Because when you talk about oppression, in the present world, we have very different kinds of institutional arrangements, obviously, than we did several centuries ago. But, I don't, for instance, see much objectively by way of oppressive arrangements these days. If there's oppression, it seems to me it's one of those more mental things, or it's one of those things that, I guess I'm wondering how you might come across the clear sort of obvious degree of intensity of disputationness these days around the world, when in a way objectively things are better than perhaps they've ever been, but you wouldn't think that looking around at what you see taking place. And which brings me back to Pareto in particular and humanitarianism and the ability of humanitarian sentiments to change the character of the people who are participating in the governmental activities that are taking place. And remember Davidi, when you mentioned Davidi, wrote a beautiful book that I hope would be translated someday. It was published in 1930 and was titled something like My 20 Years of Political Struggle, or something like that. And if you those were largely responses to his experiences while he was a member of parliament as a practitioner of actual public finance. And what you get from that collection of essays is no sense of people, members of parliament, you get no sense of members of parliament trying to, in an empirical way, bring about and realize the theorems of welfare economics. What you get is a clear sense of coalitions of members of parliament seeking to advance the interest of particular subsets who they support and who they like, which is, I think, obviously a very different image of practical public finance. And what I know about Einaudi, which is less than Davidi, that I think Einaudi would have a similar kind of outlook to Davidi, or not, as would wonder about what you might think.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. The audio was not so good. Sometimes I lost some of your reflection. Could you try, please, to summarize your question? I'm sorry that I lost some pieces of your reflection.
Davidi's practical experience in Parliament led to the publication of this.
I know the book. Yeah.
And that is a view of politics that fits in with, at best, I would think, the image of government as a kind of what Vincent Ostrom later called a Faustian bargain, of at best the use of evil instruments, hopefully to do good, recognized that a lot of evil is going to come out of the deal too, as Davide stressed in his work. And I think that outlook could stand corrected, you might say. But I think from what I know, which is less of Einaudi than of Davide, that Einaudi had a similar kind of view of government, which is very different from almost all of modern public finance, welfare economics, and so forth, which is rather a view that government is fundamentally an instrument of beneficence in society, with a few cases, aberrations, where things go wrong.
Yeah. I mean, okay. Yes. Now I think I got your point. Yes. And now you even reviewed the book by David. You have to reread this kind of review. I think it's an important one. So Einaudi endorsed entirely David's point. He was a liberist. I mean, as they were used to say in the Italian strange way of saying libertarianism, but it's a little bit more nuanced and complicated. But anyway, now they endorsed the battles. And as far as I remember, in that review, he fully endorsed them. And it was a kind of very bad view of bad image that David restituted to the Italian public of the working of the parliament. And that was also a way to say, well, free trade, liberalism, and liberalism cannot be realized because the parliament doesn't work, and it's simply a fight or kind of power struggles and so forth. But you also have to keep in mind this, that when Einaudi started his reflection was much later, David's book that you were mentioning. They were already under fascism, as I was mentioning before. Now Einaudi's, compared to even to Pareto's view, and we do not have to forget that Pareto ended up endorsing fascism. And in many respects, Pareto believed, this is a statement by Pareto, that, as he said, la libertà è un lusso, liberty is a luxury. So, and no, it's not for everybody. And the public opinion doesn't work, which is a crucial junction in now this way of thinking. The public opinion as a critical public opinion and capable of saying, as I said before, no, when it is the case to say no. So Einaudi was mainly worried about this kind of political theory or elite theories, because elite theories under fascism became a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. Under fascism, this kind of elite theory became something like, this is the way the power of fascism works. It works simply by authority and instruments of legitimization of power, that is political formulas, to use Mosca words, or derivations, to use Pareto's words. So fascism is there, has created this gigantic machine of persuasion through formulas, rituals, and so forth. And so, and now this worry was, okay, what do we do now with this kind of legal political theory of elite and strategy of legitimation of power? They are no more than a legitimation of the fait accompli, of the fact that the power is there and therefore is legitimized simply in that way, as this kind of theory describes. So now he was trying to at least find a way to distinguish between the good and the bad elite. But at the same time, that was not enough, because he also needed to say, well, even if we had a good elite, we need good people that endorses this good elite, that votes for them. So we are in this kind of vicious circle or spiral of decadence, and how can we get out of that? So that was his main claim. So he needed to get rid of this kind of legal political theory, because you know, even fear that scholars were by simply endorsing this theory, were endorsing fascism. So the problem for him was, how can we rebuild the liberal state from the scratch or on any new human basis, human foundations? So that's why he insisted so much on liberty. I'm not sure whether I have to work on this. One of my projects is to write a paper on Einaudi and De Viti, but of course I have to study a little bit better De Viti. But I'm sure that what Einaudi was trying to do is to historicize, so to say, De Viti's ideal types of states, the cooperative and the monopoly state, and they needed to do that because it was not clear how the cooperative and how you can go from the cooperative to the monopolistic state or vice versa. So that's why Einaudi was interested in this kind of description of a rise and fall of civilization on the phenomenology, I would say, of this kind of societies. So that's why he needed to stress so much the issue of liberty as the engine of history and the way in which you can go through one model to another. But anyway, I don't know if I replied to your question.
Certainly had. Nicely. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think we have time for one more quick one from Mikayla.
Yes, thank you very much, Paolo. A really fascinating presentation on your part, and congratulations to you for that. A question in two interrelating parts, if I may. So the first one is, did Einaudi, did he engage, to what extent did he engage with Pantaleone's conceptualization of taxation as effectively a parasitical attachment upon sort of market sort of generated activities in varied ways? And then the second sort of aspect of my question is, to what extent did Einaudi endogenize the civilizing sort of process? So I'm intrigued to sort of see from your reading of the literature to what extent, let's say, he engaged with Pareto's sort of sociology with respect to the rhetorical production of non-logical rhetorics with respect to, let's say, taxes as a price, a worthy price of civilization. Even as an aside, Norbert Elias's idea of the rulers seeking to civilize a population, including through taxes, to pacify the public. So I'm interested in the extent to which, particularly, Einaudi engaged with his forebears in the Italian traditions. If you have a little bit of time to respond, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mikayla. These are two very deep, interesting questions. Honestly, I haven't dig so much. I mean, I know that Einaudi was a big fan of Pantaleone. But to my knowledge, he didn't address Pantaleone's understanding of this kind of parasitical issue. Well, he mentioned Pantaleone many times as one of the king, I would say, of the Italian tradition in public finance. He also mentioned the fact that Pantaleone was one of the very first to try to introduce marginalism into public budgeting. As I was trying to explain before also to Richard, my impression that in the very last reflection, now they try to not to talk about parasitism and all this kind of bad stuff, I would say, because we were under fascism. So he was a leader in his field. So he was also the most important, I would say, opinion maker, economist opinion maker of his time. He was the greatest, gigantic journalist. Think about the fact that only his journal articles occupy something like 8 gigantic volumes. I'm talking about thousands and thousands of articles written before the fascism put him out from the Corriere della Sera, that was the main journal on which he was working. So Einaudi was also speaking to the vast public when he was writing Myths and Paradoxes of Justice in Taxation, to say something like, well, don't give up to this kind of theory because they are some sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe in them, then we might end up in legitimizing fascism. So we need to find the good people, the good ruling class, the good citizens, so to say, that are capable of inverting the vicious cycle in which we are. So I think that at least in that period now, they tried to avoid this kind of negative effects or bad side, I don't know how to call them, this collateral effects or of public budgeting and the political process, including parasites. As to the second questions, I don't know whether now they really try to endogenize this story of civilization. Could you remind me? I mean, the second question, I forgot.
Oh, yeah. Okay, no worries. So very briefly, my question was with respect to Einaudi actually effectively endogenize the civilizing sort of process of production of good people, because certainly it would seem the ruling class might have a role to sort of play in that, I would have thought.
Of course, endogenizing is not something that is present in Einaudi's language and thought, but I could say that at least the political class played a sort of coordinating mechanism in at least two respects. The first one is it's a source of trust and reflects trust in the sense that if they are perceived by citizens as a good ruling class, they may pay taxes not simply for economic thought-based reasons, like I pay taxes to get something at a time. I'm not calculating exactly the quid pro quo, sorry, in this process of understanding of the benefit principle of taxation. And they are also, I would say, a coordinating, or they play, the ruling class play a sort of coordinating mechanism, at least in the sense that let's say in this way, people may be willing, so to say, to pay taxes if they trust the political class. I don't know how to say this. Sorry, it's a little bit complicated. Okay, give me maybe when I'll be there in Mercatus or the Market and Society conference. I will try to give you a better explanation. But this is maybe we should work on this.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you to you. Is there another?
Roger, if you want to go real fast, we're going to wrap up, though. I do want to respect people's time.
If I'm a total Einaudi, devotee, and I look about me in the political situation today, either in Italy or here in the United States or in the United Kingdom, so what? What are the implications for me as a citizen, or perhaps as a public intellectual?
Yes, this is a good question, but I haven't made any reflection about contemporaneity. I was just trying to reconstruct this attempt to deal with the Italian tradition in public finance. But anyway, I don't know what to say. I mean, I know that the so what is a big question in this case, because you might say, well, I mean, what can we do? I was simply trying to show whether or not it could still be relevant for public finance, at least to get rid of this kind of obsession for rules of the game, institutions matters, and all this kind of claims that maybe are a little bit misleading if you don't take into account the very simple fact that institutions, in order to work well, need good people. But I don't know. I mean, I cannot say more than that. It might be, of course, not enough, but it's. I think it's already signed, at least, to avoid this kind of overconfidence in rules, because of course this kind of overconfidence in rule or in constitutional engineering mechanism produce maybe more rules than needed, and they also distract us from the very simple fact that a good society needs, I mean, a basic, a fundamental circulation of trust between you and me and citizens, and also, I mean, the fact that the coercion, as Einaudi said, enters into play when this kind of basic trust is not working any longer, is, I think, is still important, at least in the sense that we have to rely a little bit less on institutions and rely a little bit more, maybe, on the way in which we realize is from the little community to the bigger society, mechanism of trust exchanges and community in the good sense of the word community.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Paolo one last time for his great presentation and paper today. This will conclude today's session. Thank you again, Paolo. Our next meeting will be November 14th at the same time, same place, your office or wherever you are. And I look forward to seeing you there. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks,
Thank you,
Paolo.
everybody.
Thanks, Dave. Thank
Yep.
you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.